Welcome to Humanity's Memory.
Jesus for political gain. Introduction. In the United States, religion has never been confined to the walls of churches. Christianity, and especially the figure of Jesus Christ, has played an outsized role in shaping American identity, culture, and politics. For centuries, leaders have invoked Jesus to inspire unity, justify wars, shape policy, or mobilize voters. What began as a genuine expression of faith has, in many cases, evolved into a strategic exploitation of religion for power and profit. The phenomenon of using Jesus for political gain has transformed elections, built massive religious industries, and polarized society. This essay explores how Jesus has been used, misused, and commodified in American politics and economics. It examines the historical roots of this phenomenon, the rise of the religious right, the interplay between faith and money, the contradictions between the teachings of Jesus and the policies justified in his name, and the consequences for both religion and democracy. Historical roots of political religion. The relationship between Christianity and American politics runs deep. The early Puritans envisioned their colonies as a city upon a hill, chosen by God to exemplify righteousness. This framing of America as a nation with divine purpose laid the groundwork for later political uses of Christianity. By the 19th century, the fusion of faith and politics intensified. Abolitionists and slaveholders alike invoked Jesus for their opposing causes. During the Civil War, both the Union and Confederacy proclaimed that God was on their side. In the 20th century, presidents like Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan used Christian language to strengthen political narratives. Eisenhower pushed "In God We Trust" onto currency, while Reagan often described the US as the last bastion of Christian civilization against communism. The Cold War made Jesus into a political soldier, a cultural icon symbolizing America's moral superiority against godless communism. Thus, long before today's culture wars, American leaders had already fused faith with political messaging. The rise of the religious right. While religion had long influenced politics, the 1970s and 1980s witnessed the institutionalization of faith as a political machine. Leaders like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson built the Moral Majority, a coalition of evangelicals mobilized around issues like abortion, homosexuality, and family values. This movement reframed voting as a spiritual duty. Candidates who aligned themselves with evangelical priorities could secure millions of votes, while those who opposed them risked being labeled enemies of God. Politicians no longer spoke about Jesus only in symbolic terms. Instead, they positioned themselves as defenders of his truth. Ronald Reagan mastered this rhetoric, calling America a nation under God and casting political battles as moral crusades. Later, George W. Bush won re-election in 2004 with overwhelming evangelical support, thanks in part to his image as a born-again Christian and his stances on same-sex marriage and abortion. Jesus in campaign. Rhetoric. The political use of Jesus often manifests in three ways. Language. Politicians pepper speeches with biblical references, signaling shared faith with voters. Phrases like "God bless America" become obligatory. Symbols. Candidates pose with Bibles, visit churches, or include crosses subtly in campaign ads. These images often matter more than policy proposals. Endorsements. Evangelical pastors publicly endorse candidates, implying that voting for them is aligned with God's will. One of the most striking examples occurred in 2020, when then-President Donald Trump staged a photo holding a Bible outside St. John's Episcopal Church after police forcibly cleared protesters. Critics saw this as a blatant misuse of faith for political theater, yet many supporters viewed it as a powerful symbol of religious strength, the prosperity gospel and the business of faith. Commercialization of Jesus in politics cannot be separated from the rise of the prosperity gospel, theology that equates faith with financial blessing. Televangelists like Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, and Paula White, who also served as an advisor to Trump, preach that wealth and success are signs of God's favor. This message dovetails neatly with American capitalism and political fundraising. Donations to churches or ministries are framed as investments in divine blessing. Politicians who align with prosperity preachers tap into both money and influence. Campaigns gain endorsements, while preachers gain legitimacy and financial reward. As a result, Jesus becomes less a savior of souls and more a guarantor of wealth and political victory. Distortion of his original teachings about humility, poverty, and service, contradictions in the political use of Jesus. The exploitation of Jesus for political gain often ignores or contradicts his teachings. On wealth, Jesus warned against serving both God and mammon, yet prosperity preaching sanctifies greed. On peace, Jesus called peacemakers blessed, but his name has been used to justify wars. On the poor, Jesus prioritized the marginalized, yet policies passed in his name often harm the poor and benefit the wealthy. On inclusion, Jesus welcomed outsiders, but political rhetoric often excludes immigrants, refugees, and minorities. This selective appropriation reduces Jesus to a political mascot rather than a radical teacher of love and justice. The polarization of faith and politics. Political exploitation of Jesus has fueled division. Many Americans now equate Christianity with conservative politics, alienating millions of believers who reject this alignment. Younger generations in particular are leaving churches that appear more interested in political battles than spiritual formation. Meanwhile, political opponents of the religious right see its claims as hypocritical, pointing out the gap between Jesus' teachings and the policies pursued in his name. The result is a society where religion no longer unites but polarizes, serving as a wedge issue rather than a shared moral compass. Jesus at the Capitol, January 6th, perhaps the most shocking example of Jesus' political misuse came during the January 6th, 2021 attack on the US Capitol. Rioters carried crosses, waved Jesus Saves banners, and prayed in the Senate chamber after storming it. Here, the image of Jesus was not merely rhetorical, it was weaponized in an insurrection against democracy itself. The blending of Christian imagery with political violence revealed the dangers of turning faith into a tool of power. Media, money, and the religious industrial complex. The political use of Jesus is sustained by a massive religious media industry. Christian television networks, radio stations, publishing houses, and social media channels broadcast political messages under the guise of faith. This industry thrives on polarization, using fear to drive donations and loyalty. Faith becomes entertainment, politics becomes theology, and Jesus becomes a brand. Politicians benefit from access to millions of mobilized voters, while religious leaders gain wealth and influence. This cycle, media, and manipulation forms what some scholars call the religious industrial complex, a machine that profits from the exploitation of Belief. Consequences for democracy. The exploitation of Jesus has profound effects on American democracy. Erosion of church-state separation. The line between religious authority and political governance blurs. Manipulation of voters. Faithful believers are persuaded to vote against their own economic interests, prioritizing symbolic issues. Corruption of faith. Christianity risks losing its moral credibility when tied to partisan politics. Weakened civic discourse. Debate becomes framed in absolute theological terms rather than pragmatic compromise. These consequences threaten both the integrity of religion and the stability of democracy. Reclaiming authentic faith. Not all Christians accept the political exploitation of Jesus. Many pastors, theologians, and believers advocate for reclaiming faith from partisan misuse. They emphasize Jesus' teachings on compassion, justice, and humility. Movements rooted in liberation theology, social justice, and interfaith cooperation resist the reduction of Jesus to a campaign slogan. Reclaiming Jesus for authentic faith means remembering that his kingdom was not of this world. It requires rejecting the temptation to merge spiritual authority with political dominance. Conclusion. The story of Jesus for political gain in America is one of paradox. On the one hand, faith has inspired justice movements, civil rights struggles, and visions of equality. On the other, it has been hijacked for profit, power, and polarization. When Jesus is turned into a political prop, his radical message of love, humility, and service is distorted. Democracy suffers, religion is corrupted, and believers are manipulated. Yet, hope remains. By disentangling faith from politics and returning to the essence of Jesus' teachings, America can rediscover a form of religion that enriches rather than exploits, that liberates rather than manipulates. Ultimately, Jesus cannot be owned by any party, campaign, or ideology. He stands above them, challenging all systems of power with a call to justice, mercy, and truth. The question is whether America will continue to use him for political gain or whether it will finally listen to his words and live by his example.